Life Over Coffee. Conversations for Transformation.
Marriage devotion number 8. The title of it is, Are You For Your Spouse? The text of Scripture is Romans chapter 8, verse 31, where Paul says, What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And then he said in Ephesians 5, verses 1 and 2, Therefore be imitators of God, as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. If you are going to imitate the Lord in your marriage, as Paul was talking about imitating God in Ephesians 5, well, imitating him in your marriage is an ideal place to begin. Then being for your spouse must be a logical and loving objective and practice. That is how Paul talked to the Romans about the Lord's attitude toward them. He said God was for them. Did you know that God is for you too? Think for a moment about how God is for you and how that motivates you to love him. God is for you is one of the most significant highlights of the gospel. He is the one person that you cannot have against you. Before Paul told the Christians in Rome that God was for them in Romans 8:31, the great apostle provided a few practical examples of how God was for them. He talked about God's active goodness on behalf of those he loves. Here's how he said it in verses 29 and 30. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. The Romans were not left to wonder about God's forness toward them. Based on his activity, they felt the assurance of his love. He foreknew them, predestined them, called them, justified them, and glorified them. Do you remember the context in which Paul wrote to the Romans? People were killing the Christians in Rome. It was a public slaughter, a time of personal disappointment and defeat. The culture had turned against them, and Paul wanted the believers to know that they were not alone. God was there. God was for them. Not only does he remind them of what God did in verses 29 and 30 about knowing, predestining, calling, glorifying, etc., by bringing them to the point to where they could clearly see God's activity in their lives, but he continued to hammer the gospel nail by repeatedly reminding them of God's sovereign protective care. You can read that as you finish the paragraph starting in Romans 8, verse 32. Speaking about God's love for them, only once was not enough for Paul. He believed in gospel redundancy, using different words and ways to say the same thing until his audience not only understood what he was saying, but that knowledge transformed them. What better thing could you give your spouse? If the Lord is for your undeserving spouse, and you are for your undeserving spouse, then your spouse is in the best place that any human could be. The two greatest things that could ever happen to a couple is for them to live in the overflowing awareness of God's unmerited pleasure in them, while exporting and experiencing each other's undeniable affection for each other. This is marriage devotion number 8. Let's take some time to reflect. You would do well to follow Paul's example by examining your heart regarding how you think about and treat your spouse. I have some questions that will aid you as you consider the gospel and its practical outworking in your marriage. Question number 1. Is your spouse assured of your love? Based on your actions, would you please explain? And then finally, question number 2. How can you practice gospel redundancy when it comes to loving your spouse and the repeating reminders of your affection? Here's a practical suggestion for marriage devotion number 8. Ask the Spirit to illuminate your mind so you can see where you may be failing. Assuming that you are, you might not be. Ask the Father to give you the power to set aside what you want while enabling you to provide Christ to your spouse. Be prepared to write down the thoughts that come to your mind as the Spirit of God illuminates you. Take your soul to task while resisting all temptations to make this about what your spouse has done to you. As you complete this project, invite your spouse into the process to discuss your thoughts with them. The ultimate goal is for both of you to share your full experience with God with each other, and the aspect that I'm talking about here in marriage devotion number 8, are you for your spouse?
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.